Recording in
Welcome, dear students of the Talmud. Um, Welcome to lesson 2 of Decoding the Talmud. Today we're going to be discussing the Mishnah and what is, how did it come about? Why did it come about? What is it? How does it work? And this is a pivotal stepping stone to understanding what the Gemara is all about, because the Gemara is based on the Mishnah and it's a basic part of the oral Torah. This is the foundation of the oral Torah. Oh, not the foundation of the oral Torah. It's the foundation of um, our oral Torah. It's not the oral Torah existed way before the Mishnah, as we're about to see. Okay. Um, I brought out a copy of a Art Scroll edition Mishnah, Tractate Pesachim. This is actually we're going to be learning a Mishnah from this, not from this book, but it is in this book also. So if you want to look it up, we have it in the shul. You can learn the entire Mishnayos. It's very easy. It's actually a very easy read. Um, Although you will have gotten it's very hard to get all the information that's intended, and we'll learn why. Okay. So let's start off with the idea of oral Torah. We have this we discussed that we had the oral Torah was made up of the written Torah. I'm just checking my phone because people might be trying to get in or anything. Okay, we have the written Torah, which is not oral, that's written. We have the received, that's and then we have the derived and we had the legislated. The last three of these were the written Torah, right? Um, right. So just to review, the received part means that Moshe taught us these rules, and there's really no dispute on those laws. They're just things that we know, and it's not that complicated. Then there's the derived. We have a methodology that Moshe taught us, um, that also kind of developed, but it's part of the oral law, that methodology of learning laws and details out of the Chumash, out of the written Torah. So every word in the written Torah could be analyzed, and something could be derived through principles and through just knowing what the text means. Then we had legislated, which was where the sages saw fit to legislate and to make rules and expand on or enhance the given Torah. Okay. Um, there's a very clear boundary that's the sages talk about. Someone trying to get in? Just a minute. Someone's trying to get in here. Oh, welcome. So in the Talmud, look at in your book on page 37, text 1. The Talmud in Gittin, which is actually the tractate that I showed you last week. It's a tractate about divorce law. So the Talmud in Gittin makes a very clear distinction between the oral and the written Torah. Let's read it. Let's read what they say here. Material that was conveyed as a text may not be recited orally, meaning you can't say it out of the text. You have to have a script. You have to have the text in front of you when quoting the written Torah. And material that was conveyed orally may not be recorded as text. So if it was instructed only orally and it's not in the Torah, you're not allowed to create a written version of that. Now, um, the rule about not quoting the Tanakh or quoting the written part of the Torah, we actually till today avoid quoting the written part of the Torah without the text in front of us, and that is to preserve the integrity of the written Torah. We're very zealous about making sure that the written Torah is not misquoted. So that it's mistaught. So whenever even if you know even the Lubavitcher Rebbe or any sage, he would never quote a pasuk in its completion. When he was quoting a verse in the Torah, he would always truncate the verse.
stuff.
Truncate. What do you mean?
Like, oh, when he interrupts
Yeah.
and then continue, or like
Oh, you make a
he
pause
completely.
between the words?
No,
I
no,
think he truncated, meaning he didn't say the whole verse. He just said part of the verse. Something like that. Yeah. Even you would say that'd be worse, if anything.
discussion about what does a blind person do. That's
Okay. Okay, this Braille. Uh, okay, but you're right. That's a that's an interesting question. How does a blind person do it? You could say there's still value to him having the book outside in front of him, because then at least the person he's talking to can see what he's talking about instead of trusting the blind person. But regardless, that's the rule. We also have the rule not to write oral Torah. Now we obviously have the oral Torah written down, or a lot of it, and it's not oral anymore. So we have to explain, first of all, why can't you write down the oral Torah? We discussed some advantages to keeping it oral last week, but why did they legislate against it, right? We know that there's some advantages to having it orally, but why is it considered problematic to write it down? So let's go through some of the explanations for why it has to be, why it needs to be oral, okay? Um, so one explanation that we find is that when a teacher is teaching it orally to his students, and the students are listening and they have to hear what the teacher is saying, the precision is on a higher level, because the student can't insert his interpretation. He can't decide what the teacher means. The teacher is saying what he means, and it has to be clarified. If I write it down, you could understand it however you want after I write it down. People who write about Lahavdil, not to compare, but if people who write commentary on Shakespeare, they have a lot more liberty because Shakespeare is not there. But when you have to when your whole job is to memorize what your teacher said, your job is not to find interpretations of what he said. Then it's a lot more precise. You have to be more loyal to the subject matter. Okay. Another idea, by the way, I want everyone to interrupt me when they have questions. So another aspect is that it takes a lot more effort and a lot more involvement and investment of the student in order to learn orally. He needs to be listening and he needs to understand. Otherwise, he's not doing anything. He's wasting his time. If someone's sitting in front of a book, they can read it later. They can catch up. There's a lot less required from the student. But when someone's listening and they have to memorize it, that's intense involvement. For an example, from today's day and age, people used to memorize the talks of the Rebbe on Shabbos, and that was very strenuous for them. So they couldn't just space out in the middle. They couldn't, they had to be there. Yeah.
It's similar in Tanya, where he was like, it says in the introduction of the Valtanya, it says like, I wrote this book so that all the audiences I had, you can find it in the book. So these two principles, I know we're not talking about Darash about pay here, but like
it's the same idea. Yeah,
it's more precise to talk to
the individual. Yes,
so it's like,
it's always more precise to talk to the source of information than the book.
in the Tanya wasn't the case that he did that. He said that because he could more specifically speak to their problem rather than trying to generalize to a whole
right.
group.
So it's the same idea here. So we see still
Similar idea, because in when you're talking about oral Torah, and let's say I'm teaching the oral Torah, I'm not really teaching it. I'm teaching the oral Torah the way that you're kind of memorizing what the law is. I don't know how much of it is catered to the listener as much as it's just like I'm just trying to transmit it. But if the listener has a question, I'm sure I can answer the question. In the Tanya, he was giving advice, right? He was teaching the individual based on the individual's needs. He wasn't telling him a bunch of information that the individual then had to incorporate. It's a little nuanced difference. What were you going to say? Anything left? No? Okay. Anyways, so that's two major things. So there's no messing around when it comes to Torah Shabbat oral law. You need to fully be very dedicated and very very committed. The second one is it keeps things exclusivity. The medrash, one of the midrashim, by the way, all these reasons are brought down in the Talmud or by different sages, explaining why the oral law had to stay oral. But there was a big threat that Judaism would be ripped off, that someone would take the identity of the Jewish people and co-opt it and create their own version of it. This happened with the written Torah a couple of times. Actually, the Medrash actually says that the fear was that the Yishmaelim, that the Arabs would take the oral law. I mean, they were much. I wonder if this was written before. Yeah, this was written before Islam. This idea.
That was a much later development.
Yeah, this idea that the Arabs might co-opt Jewish texts was written in the Medrash. I see in Bamidbar Rabbah. I didn't look that Medrash up. It's fascinating that they were worried that there would be Arabs or Yishmaelim who are our cousins, and they would claim that they are Jews if they had access to the oral law. Islam actually is more inspired, I think. I feel there's a lot of midrashim incorporated into the Quran's narratives. So ironically, they were inspired. It actually happened. It's pretty funny, but either way, that's a side point. Not to get on a tangent here, but so that's the first thing. Keep it safe from bad actors and just like to protect your intellectual property, and so it doesn't get distorted and misused and abused, which is what can happen to powerful ideas. And then another aspect is to keep it exclusive so that you don't have charlatans who are Jewish, who are, propagating the wrong interpretations of things and claiming to be knowledgeable in an area where they're not, just because they've read the book. If they're not a genuine receiver of the oral Torah, of the tradition, right? They weren't there when the source of the information was being given, right? Then they're not. Their opinion really doesn't matter.
But it's sort of like also, isn't it, that, I mean, you see what's happening with Talmud, that anybody can quote Talmud.
Yeah.
Studying Talmud.
Yeah.
And misuse it by little snippets.
Yeah.
That's, I think.
Yeah, that's what we're preventing.
Exactly what they were trying to
When you write it down, you give access. You give access to bad actors or to people who are not innocent people who don't realize that they're not Torah scholars. Good question. We're about to learn. What a segue. I thought you were going to say when's recess. That's the only question I get in Hillel. Okay.
Why would he, if he knew that would happen?
Right. Okay. That's what we have to discuss. It was considered very, very problematic to write it down, and it was the way it's a very big deal because this is the way people learn Torah. They gathered in big groups, right, in a big lecture hall, very centralized, right. There was only one place to really go. It wasn't like you could just open up a book somewhere, and just start learning. You had to go travel to the center of learning, wherever it happened to be, Jerusalem or wherever, and learn from the leaders of the generation. I mean, that was the only option. And you would sit and everyone would listen, in a class of hundreds or thousands at some time, and that's how you learn Torah. And to change that is a very, very radical shift. So we're going to learn about that, why that shift happened in a minute. Okay. Towards the end of the 2nd century, there was a very dramatic decision to compose a written record of the oral law. And this is what we call the Mishna. So let's examine the historical background of this decision. So first of all, the rabbis of the Mishnah are called Tanaim. Tana, right? Tana means Tana comes from the word, well, it means to teach, but it's also in Aramaic, they substitute the taf for a shin, right? So in Hebrew, that would be shana, which also means to repeat. And so they were kind of the repeaters of the oral Torah. Oral Torah is taught through repetition, right? And there's a whole system. The rabbi says it, the students repeat it. There's a whole system. It's not just the rabbi says it and everyone goes home and there's a whole system there. So they did a lot of repetition. In fact, there's an example in this. There's an idea in the Talmud that someone who learns something 101, right? It's harder than the first 100 times. The 101st time is harder than the first 100 times. It was common practice to learn anything new 100 times. That was the common practice. You didn't know it if you didn't learn it 100 times. Okay, so If it sounds like I'm repeating myself, that's the idea. Okay. So the sages are called Tanaim. And then we have that was written at the end of the 2nd century. Interesting fact, any Mishnah that you read, right? 99.9% of them are post Hillel. There's someone named Hillel. Hillel was the president, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin around 30 BCE. And right, we got the Torah 1312 BCE, right? So that's a really long stretch of time with no quotes. We just don't have any rabbis quoted in the Mishnah, any Tanaim from before Hillel.
How is it possible?
What do you think?
Remembering among us all, I'm the naive one here. Definitely. I thought it was the case that the rabbis weren't the rabbis became more important once the Jewish people were more dispersed. And that happened out, certainly after 78.
What do you mean by more important? Central or because of legislation?
Before that there was the Sanhedrin, and
those are the rabbis that we're talking about.
Well, those are the rabbis, but then there were more. But then, they were also worried about the Romans, and once they were dispersed, then I thought it was the case that the rabbis became sort of the nuclear. The separate rabbis all over became more important.
Yes, you're touching on the answer. Do you want to say something?
No. It's a pre destruction of the temple. He was like
He was pre-destruction.
But just barely.
Yeah.
So there was already
just around that time. No, like it was
Yeah.
So Hillel, if Hillel was 30 BCE, the temple was destroyed at I think 70 CE. Yeah. Yeah.
But
He had time.
Also issues with that.
Yeah, tons of issues, and we're gonna describe them. But Hillel, you're right. That's exactly you're right.
I need him to tell me what cancer is.
So you're right. There are people who say that this is proof that the whole rabbinic Judaism was invented by Hillel or his colleagues or post Hillel. This is obviously not true, and it's actually the answer becomes really obvious when you read the Mishnah. Every single
No, like how what does that statistic mean specifically? That there are no pre-Hillel.
You're not going to see a name of someone in the Mishnah that's going to say Omar Rabbi whatever who existed pre-Hillel and Shammai.
I guess everyone was there were no debates before that. Everyone was.
That's the answer. There were no debates before that. It's exactly what Rav Sharira Gon writes in one of his letters. He writes the whole history of the Talmud development. The Gaonim were, just briefly about Sharira Gon, the Gaonim were the leaders of Babylonian Judaism post Talmud, and they were the first generation post Talmud that interpreted the Talmud, and they primarily answered questions based on the Talmud. So they wrote a lot of answers to situations based on the Talmud. It wasn't an organized halachic books that they wrote. They just more wrote their halachic rulings. And they gave rise to the next level, which was the Rishonim, who interpreted the Talmud more aggressively. But the Gaonim were that very early Talmudic. So Rav Shir Gaon writes this all. We can actually have it in page 38, text 2. The ancient Torah scholars did not publish the names of the authors of particular Jewish Torah teachings, with the exception of the names of a head or deputy of the Sanhedrin, because among them there was no controversy. They had clarity of knowledge regarding all Torah concepts. Okay, so the basic idea is we have thousands of laws in the Mishnah that don't actually have someone's name attributed to them, right? They're just laws. And then the Mishnah brings disputes by name. The only time you need to say the name of the person is when it's disputed, because we want to know who has that opinion. But if there's no opinion given to it, it's just consensus, right? It wouldn't say consensus is and then say the law. It just says the law.
That's what
Yeah,
it's kind of-
Chachamim, Rabbanan, Stam. Yeah, it's actually, yeah, there's a whole debate. Like,
Sometimes.
that's what he said.
when
if there's a debate, well, yeah, what do you say?
It's like, but if it's the Tanakama, it doesn't always say his name.
Who's the Tanakama?
Right. First one. Whoever, like, in the argument.
That's just the way we refer to the first guy, the first statement of the Mishnah, right? We don't know who it is.
It could be very different people every time.
Could be.
So if you said, I get an last question.
The Gemara always tries to figure that out. Who is that?
Right.
But when there's a dispute, it says the Chachamim say
Mm.
something else. But if there's no Chachamim, if it just says a law and then it says we're going to learn exactly one of these Mishnayos. A lot of them are like this. It just says the law, and then it says another law that there's a dispute about. But that law is just given over.
So we're still talking about Mishnah.
That's
At this
all.
point, we're
This is
not
all
talking about
Mishnah.
Gemara.
All Mishnah. Yeah. The Gemara tries to figure out who certain people are when there's a debate and there's no name given.
Because I thought you said
Yeah.
the Yerushalmi, there's no debate in there, so.
Yeah.
It's still been written down, they were still.
They just didn't write that down.
all
There's
the
arguments in
worded-
there. They just didn't write down all the arguments. They didn't write down all the different opinions. But the only purpose of quoting people is to say which ones hold what, as opposed to just consensus. Interestingly, we're not going to go into Rabbi Meir. It's a fascinating topic of who Rabbi Meir was and how he is anonymously in every Mishnah. But whatever, we'll save that for another time. Because this is a long class. So that answers the question basically. What happened by Hillel that all of a sudden you had a bunch of opinions about different things, right? Right? You had thousands of years where you just had all these laws being studied, and you had consensus, and you had a decision, and then you have these disputes erupting around all the different areas, like in a lot of different areas. So what happened throughout the generations that changed? So the Torah actually. There always were disputes, but there was actually a resolution. There was a way to resolve the disputes, and the Torah gives us the way to do that. And if we see in your student book in page 39, text 3, the Maimonides actually describes how they would resolve doubt. Right? So you have hundreds of students, right, studying by learning day and night, and they had different. They obviously didn't all understand everything perfectly, perhaps, or they had different conclusions. So there's a way to resolve these issues. As long as the Supreme Sanhedrin functioned, there were never prolonged differences of opinion among the Jewish people, meaning they weren't prolonged because they were resolved. Rather, any Jewish individual who developed a doubt regarding any law would simply inquire of the Jewish court of their city. If that local court was aware of the solution, it would inform that individual. If not, both the questioner and that court or its agents would ascend to Jerusalem and pose a dilemma to the greater court that held session in the Temple Mount. If that court knew the answer, it would supply it. If not, the entire group would proceed together to the higher court that held session at the entrance to the temple courtyard. If it knew the solution, it would supply it. If not, they would all proceed to the chamber of hewn stone in which the Supreme Sanhedrin held court and pose the dilemma to the Sanhedrin. Fascinating point that we're doing this description on Parshas Yisro, which is when this was invented by Yisro. He told Moshe, stop teaching everyone orally. They're waiting, their feet are hurting. Why did Moshe want to do that? Because it's better to hear from Moshe than to hear from Moshe's disciple. So Moshe wanted to give everyone that opportunity, but Yisro's like, you can't really start a religion like that. I know, because I started many religions. So yeah, that's how things used to be resolved. And that's how halacha is made. They used to vote, and the majority would win. And Torah prescribes this very clearly. The majority is followed by the Sanhedrin. Now, if you don't have that system functioning anymore, you end up with dispute. Okay? And we're going to describe how that developed in a second. Okay, so you have this system functioning smoothly for about 1,300 years. And they had lots of problems historically, right? And you had hundreds of scholars in every generation, or even thousands that were very diligently transmitting and studying and resolving and deriving and legislating. All this is all happening with a lot of broad consensus because it was very, very centralized. Okay, and they were very. It was a very intense, very rigorous system of transmission.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Hey, how many rabbis were on the Sanhedrin? What's the population of the Sanhedrin? 10, 20, 30?
71, but they keep adding people if they can't resolve something. But yes, actually, it's very fascinating to look up in Maimonides how he describes the construction of the Sanhedrin. It was the court of a bunch of the top sages in the planet, and then in the room you had students, and they were the backup judges, and they all sat in rows depending on their scholarship level. Right? They sat behind each other, and each one filled in for judges whenever they needed to add judges, or it was really a very, very impressive system of how they came to consensus and how they argued things and things like that. A good question. So actually, Napoleon tried to create a Sanhedrin. You can look that up later. It's very interesting. He tried to basically change Judaism. So he's like, how can you change Judaism if no one's going to accept this? Some rabbi that I forced to make an edict. Oh, I'll make a Sanhedrin, and they'll just create a whole new Judaism that fits the French ideology. Okay, and now we got Betzalel Fuhal, who is a descendant of Napoleon, right here in this room.
From Paris.
Okay. Okay. So just let's continue. So let's learn. Let's see what historical situation caused this beautiful system of resolving doubt, resolving dispute. How did that come to a close?
Land of Israel first fell under Roman rule in the year 63 BCE, with Pompey's successful siege of Jerusalem. The next century and a half was a particularly traumatic period of Jewish history. Judea continued to function as a monarchy, but it was no longer independent. Judea became a client kingdom of the Roman Republic, and its monarchs were Rome-appointed puppets. Herod, perhaps the most infamous of the client kings, was installed in 36 BCE. Herod was the descendant of an Idumean convert to Judaism, who managed to curry favor with the rulers of the Roman Empire. He married the princess of the royal family of Israel, and eventually reigned over Israel on behalf of the Roman Empire. During the early phase of his rule, Herod massacred many of the leading Jewish sages, seeing their authority as a threat to his own. He also massacred the entire Maccabean family, including his own Maccabean wife and children. Despite the horrors, upheavals, and deprivations suffered by the Jews of Judea during this time, many continued to invest their efforts into studying, clarifying, and perpetuating God's holy Torah. Among them were two famous co-leaders of the sages, Hillel and Shammai. They and their students struggled mightily to navigate the turbulence of Roman subjugation. Following the death of Hillel, his grandson Rabban Gamliel served as both spiritual and communal leader of the Jewish people. He worked tirelessly to prevent the Jews from descending into direct armed conflict with Rome, but it was not an easy task. Roman excesses repeatedly drove the people to the brink, but on each occasion, disaster was avoided. Finally, during the reign of Emperor Nero in approximately 68 CE, the dam broke. Assorted factions of Jewish fighters rebelled against their Roman oppressors, dragging the entire land of Israel into merciless war. By the war's end, the Jerusalem temple lay in ruins. Hundreds of thousands of Jews met violent deaths. Were carted off into slavery. but the Jews, resilient. The surviving population flung itself into the task of recovery, hampered as before by relentless Roman persecution. Despite devastations and defeats, the Jews lay down their swords only temporarily. Fresh tensions broke to the fore when a Jewish leader named Kokhba emerged and led a second massive Judean uprising against Rome. Bar Kokhba achieved astonishing early successes that shook Rome badly. He was acclaimed by some of the greatest sages of that era to be the Jewish Messiah, but in time, Rome prevailed once more, and the Jewish army fell at Beitar. This time, the consequences for Judea were unbearably severe. Almost the entire population of southern Israel was destroyed, and the burned and brutalized land was left bereft of its people.
So the context of Hillel and Shammai coming out, right? Was this extreme upheaval, in sorry. This is always challenging. We had this upheaval in the Jewish world. And Herod actually was responsible for a lot of it. He would execute sages because he wanted to consolidate his power, and he wanted to take away the power from the sages. And so he created a lot of issues with that. And even when the sages, when they were able to learn, they weren't able to gather in the same central type of way. And the whole way oral Torah is taught, right, is in a big room so now you have pockets of people learning and discussing and figuring things out, but they're not able to really make very broad, very powerful, big decisions. I'm sure they could if they wanted to, but on the daily or the regular style of learning was affected. So you end up having Hillel and Shammai who are doing this kind of in their own silos in a certain way, and they're learning, and their students are all learning from and they have to choose, and you don't have and their rulings don't have the weight of the Sanhedrin, of the Great Court, even though they still had a Sanhedrin, but they weren't ruling all of these matters. And so you have disputes about almost everything, how many candles to light, how to light them. Hillel says, Hillel and Shammai argue about which prayers to say on Pesach, what the value of a minimum value of a wedding ring has to be, how to praise the bride at a wedding. They argue about many, many, many things. How to make Kiddush on Friday night, and which foods you could use to make to have a festival meal. They basically debated tons of things, and following the structure of the temple, you had this period where the sages were like, okay, we're just going to go with Hillel most of the time, right? They decided we're going to get consensus here. Like the major disputants were Hillel and Shammai, and we said, okay, we're going to have Hillel and his students. We're going to go after their path. Right? And that's generally going to be the way it works. But we still had more disputes coming up, and you still had more difficulty reaching consensus. And you always had new questions coming up that this always happened, but before you had consensus, you had a way to resolve it. Yeah.
This is not like a scholarly question, though. Like it's a little provocative, but if there was full consensus before Hillel.
Yeah. Full resolution,
full
but
resolution and consensus. How many? I mean, obviously, Hanukkah wasn't a given, but what do you do on Shabbos? Like simple kind of questions.
Yeah.
Why did it have to be litigated after, unless the Yidden collectively completely forgot this? Like the basic rules. Is that what happened? Because of the upheaval, they were like starting to drift away and like forget about the rules, or like how?
If you see a dispute in the Mishnah, it's because they're no. Well, it could be it's a it is litigated.
Okay.
It could be that it's being litigated, but it also can be that this was litigated after the Sanhedrin was already not making consensus on these things, meaning you could look at a dispute in the Mishnah. You're saying if you see a dispute in the Mishnah of how to make Kiddush, right?
You know, what I'm saying is like, how can they be so unclear about like basic practice of Judaism that they had to have, you know, disputes resolved for basic things?
Which basic things?
Basic things, you know, can you make Kiddush on, like, what, if you don't have wine, what do you make Kiddush on? I mean, I'm assuming like, you know, that type of thing, or like, you know, Zmanim, or the things that would have been part of the basic day-to-day Jewish practice that everyone would know. And then why do you have then arguments in the Mishnah? Unless you say that the Mishnah records the decision of the Sanhedrin to a certain extent as well. That
If there's no dispute, it is recording that.
okay.
Right? If there's a dispute, that means that either the dispute came up after it didn't come up before, meaning that they just didn't deal with this issue, this question before,
Okay.
right? Or they are relitigating it because they don't know, they did forget it.
Oh.
But the Rambam does not like that. He doesn't say that anything was forgotten. The Rambam says the Rambam doesn't say that things are forgotten. He more says that things were litigated because of they just didn't come up, and they're deriving more things and things like that. What were you gonna say?
I'm sort of that. I thought it was the case that things were always coming up with the Sun. It's not that the Sanhedrin glossed over it. It's just that you got the opinion of the Sanhedrin, and all the arguments that were going on were not really reported. It was only after the Sanhedrin,
Right.
when you have these individuals, and I could easily be wrong. That's my understanding.
Right. Yeah. So you're saying they did have those debates. But why weren't they resolved? Why? Let's say they have a debate about, like, you know.
They continually had debates. It's
Right.
not that
They always
ever-
continually had debates.
Debates, and it's not that they even relitigated. It's
Right.
If we'd had the court transcript from the Sanhedrin, we would see. I'm saying this, I don't know if it's true, but I thought this. We would see a lot of debate. It's just that what was reported is the consensus opinion.
Right. Yes. Absolutely.
And
Yes.
it was after the Sanhedrin was resolved and you couldn't go there. Then you started having that's what I tried to say earlier.
But he's asking he's saying why are some of the things in the Mishnah, why weren't they resolved? He's asking why weren't they resolved before, like 100 years earlier, when the Sanhedrin was answering? Meaning, why is there anything left even to debate? Right?
Yeah, I guess the more, like you said, the more advanced cases or things that didn't happen before, now that
Yeah.
under Roman occupation.
A lot of the things you'll see are not. Yeah, a lot of the things you'll see are areas that either they didn't seek clarification in, like, how do you arrange the parsha? How do you arrange the segments in the tefillin? Right? You have one. This isn't even in the Mishnah. You have one Rashi and one Rabbeinu Tam. These are Rishonim. These are post Talmud, post Gaonim, Rishonim. How are they debating that? How do they not know that how to order the parshas in the tefillin, the sections in the tefillin? There's different approaches to that answer. The easiest approach is they straight up forgot.
There's always 4 different
Or Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam's parents didn't wear tefillin. I don't know, but the answer is there are always different opinions about how to order the tefillin. It was always like that. They never reached a consensus on that. Meaning that opinion, the different opinions always existed, and they never resolved it. And so you had different groups in Judaism. For whatever reason, the Sanhedrin never took that up and decided which way it should be. They were both. They found them. They found ancient tefillin, and they found both Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi as well. No, they were exactly like your tefillin, your future tefillin. They were Chabad tefillin, if you must know. They were actually this big, but they were tiny. They were worn every day. I mean, all day. They were worn in battle.
Today you wouldn't even pay $10 for it. Like if you saw how they're probably not as precise as today.
I would imagine they aren't. It's probably very hard to get. They probably did have beautiful pairs of tefillin, but they were probably very expensive. Yeah. But okay, let's move on. Okay, let's move on. This topic actually takes up the most time because it's so complicated. And actually, the other Jailek course, which is all about this, all right, it deals with it a lot more in depth. But it is complicated how these things work. But in general, just the smooth version of this is like the black and white easy version is that is the story that we just told. So anyways, where were we so Hadrian was persecuting the sages, and actually there's a very, very powerful story in the Talmud about just this. At some point after during the second revolt, the sages were facing a complete loss of the oral tradition. There was it really came to a head when we're like, okay, it's down to the wire. We're going to lose everything, and this is very dangerous because Hadrian banned public teaching of Torah. Okay? When he did that, Rabbi Akiva saw this as a very existential threat to Judaism. And his immediate reaction was to go into public and to teach Torah. That's what Rabbi Akiva did. And someone said, "Are you nuts? Why can't you just toe the line and just go into hiding in some cave and teach Torah there to your students? Why do you have to go and do this? And you'll be much safer if you just stop teaching Torah." And his answer was very famous. It's in text 4, page 41. Rabbi Akiva said, "Let me relate a parable. To what is this phenomenon compared? To a fox that strolls along a river and notices that fish have gathered and are repeatedly racing from one side of the river to the other. The fox inquires, 'Why are you fleeing?' The fish reply, 'We're fleeing from nets that humans are casting for us.' Suggests the fox, 'Would you like to ascend to dry land to escape the nets? We can live together up here, just as my ancestors resided with your ancestors.'" In the Gemara, they knew that people used to be fish. I mean, not people, but foxes at least. Okay, the fish retorted, "Aren't you the creature they described as the cleverest animal? You are not clever. You are a fool. If we are afraid for our survival while we're in the water, our natural habitat that sustains our very life, then in a habitat that causes our death, we would be all the more certain of dying. The same is true of us Jews. We are actively engaged in studying the Torah that is described as your life and your length of days, and nevertheless, we fear for our lives. If we were to go ahead and desist from its study, we would have far greater grounds to fear for our survival." So he wasn't just teaching ideas. He was teaching it was his lifeblood. It was the water that we live in, and he saw this as a very important thing to continue to do. Obviously, we all know that he was arrested and he was brutally, graphically murdered. We recount that. Yeah, they flayed it. Okay, so it was very horrible. But these persecutions, this very severe persecution of Torah study only lasted a few years. But his prediction of national death, or his prediction that would result from stopping public Torah study was not an exaggeration, because the whole way that Torah was studied was orally. Imagine if the chief transmitter of the oral Torah retired. It would completely stop the entire thing. It would shut it down. There was no Judaism anymore. Okay? So obviously he couldn't let that happen. Even for a few years. You have to constantly be learning. Constantly. Otherwise it just fizzles out. Steps in Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Yeah? Yehuda Hanassi rose up, and he came from a very illustrious family. His father was Rabbi Shimon, who he led the generation of the post-Hadrianic recovery. His grandfather was Rabbi Gamliel, and he was a leader of the Jewish nation's recovery from the destruction of the temple. So his whole family was basically leaders of leaders of leaders. And his great-great-grandfather was who? Hillel. Right? So he was straight from Hillel. Every single one of his parents were the leaders of the Jewish people. But he definitely took the cake. He was famous for having a relationship with the Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius, who also was a famous person for his stoicism, I think. It might be a different Marcus, really. Could be. He was a pretty nice guy to the Jews. So it could be. Also, we talked about Nero before. Nero wasn't a nice guy. His son or grandson, depending on the opinion, was Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was the foremost scholar and student of Rabbi Akiva, and he was the one who basically was the basis of the Mishnah, even though he didn't write the Mishnah. But Rabbi Meir is the basis of the Mishnah. His style of learning and his understanding of the tradition. And I mentioned last week that converts were so pivotal to the transmission of the Torah. Rabbi Akiva's father was a convert. Rabbi Meir is from the Roman emperor. So it's just very fascinating.
I always thought you mentioned Tanakama before. I thought that the unattributed Tanakama was always supposed to be Rabbi Meir. But
So there's a whole discussion about what that actually means. It's not Rabbi Meir's, according to Rabbi Shuri Gaon, it's not Rabbi Meir's opinion, but it's Rabbi Meir's teaching. Meaning, Rabbi Meir was the source of our knowledge about that opinion, but it's not his opinion. When we say this is Hillel's opinion, this is Hillel's opinion. Generally speaking, I'm sure Rabbi Hillel got it from his teacher, but Rabbi Meir, and there's also the Gemara is more referring to when it says that a stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, or a default unquoted anonymous Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. It's referring to also it could be referring to when the Mishnah says an opinion without saying who it is, like anonymously quotes someone. Right? Meaning it's saying that someone had this opinion, but it's not saying who. Usually it says others.
right.
That's a Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir started a fight with the wrong person, and so he was basically censored out of the Mishnah, which is a wild assertion, wild thing. Yeah, it's brought down in the Talmud. Okay, moving on. So look, if you see in figure 2.1, page 43, you can see the family of princes, you can see the lineage and the different descriptions of each person up to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. He was exceptional. He was once in a generation. He was one of those, nexus points in Jewish history, like Rabbi Akiva, like Moses. But Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is regarded higher than all of them, higher than anybody besides for Moses. Like he is the guy according to the Talmud, right? It says Maimonides brings this down. You can see in text 5 on page 44. It says he was unique in his generation, singular in his era, filled with all of the pleasant and desirable good character traits, to the extent that he earned the great merit, whereby all the people of his own generation referred to him reverently as Rabbeinu HaKadosh. His name was Yehuda. He was entirely complete with wisdom and virtue. In fact, our sages stated that we have not seen a combination of Torah and greatness in a single individual from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu until Rebbe. Interestingly enough, people say about Maimonides, from Moshe Rabbeinu until Moshe ben Maimonides himself, there has never been anyone like Moshe ben Maimon. So this same thing that he's quoting about Rebbe was said about Rambam. I'm not sure there's anyone else in Jewish history that we say that phrase about. It was famously said about Moses Mendelssohn, but I don't know if that's that. Okay. Anyways, so he was perfect. He was perfect in piety and humility, and he distanced himself from material pleasures. He was eloquent in speech. So yeah, it goes on and on. But he was an amazing, powerfully gifted scholar. I mean, look what he did. We'll see in a second how impressive his work.
I don't know
What's
what
that?
I'm going to be playing. So in that instance, it's best to bring my app attachment.
What's happening here?
This before, but a lot of you still ask questions about it. So I thought I'd walk you through it one more time. This is how easy it is to go from a straight tenor trombone to an epitaph.
Well, let me just mute you.
Often the trickiest part is just getting the tuning.
All right.
This is amazing. When did the violinist come in?
This happens at school also. That's why you have Go Guardian. Shut down people's tabs. Okay, let's moving on here. Okay, let's go. So Rabbi Huda came. So Rabbi Huda is this person who said, and him and his colleagues, not just him. It wasn't his own only one. He decided we're going to write down the Mishnah. He made this big decision. Why? Because he was living in an era where he saw there was peace. They were finally able to sit and learn. They were finally able to think and develop and to work out these disputes and to organize it. So he took it upon himself to say, hey, we're gonna future-proof Judaism. Okay? We're gonna think ahead. It's nice now, but we know it's gonna happen soon. Okay? And this style of learning Torah is not going to last. We're going to be totally forgotten. So they made a very hard decision, which is to take the oral law, which is so beautifully preserved in an oral fashion, and to commit it to writing. And this is what he did when he compiled the Mishnah. So, and this was a very major departure from Jewish tradition and a very dramatic decision. Although it democratized Judaism very well. It made it accessible. It made it something that it never was before, right? And now it's portable. So it's a little bit of a loss as far as the quality, but it goes further out, and you see this theme throughout Jewish history. You got the temple, which is an amazing godly experience, but then that's centralized, and now Judaism is everywhere. So it has pluses and minuses. Okay. Anyway, so if you can see in figure 2.2, the reasons for composing the Mishnah. You can see the problems, increased halachic disputes, cause, solution. You could just take a look at that. We're going to move on though.
That's a little bit of an answer to your first part, increase a lot of disputes.
Yeah. So Rabbi Yehuda and his colleagues set out to accomplish three things when they wrote the Mishnah. They wanted to reach halachic consensus, meaning they wanted to comb through all of the different conversations that were happening and decide which ones or what they're going to record and what not record. This is before they even decided to record. First, they were going to organize, and they were going to make things like unified and accessible. Then they were going to create an official text for universal use and write down the oral Torah so it wouldn't be forgotten. And so they were composing notes for a long time and then finally they had the final, they redacted, they finally got the finished version, but it was a bunch of notes and additions and this and that, crazy amount of work, and they worked probably day and night without stop, because the entire future of the Jewish people was riding on this. Yeah, everyone had to come together and say what they learned, and they recorded it, and that's exactly what they did. They surveyed everybody, they got everyone's input, and that's how they got it. So and this idea of breaching tradition, the Talmud talks about it. It doesn't explain why or how they were allowed to do it. It just says that they quoted an idea that sometimes you have to do something for Hashem that's against kind of the ideal thing to do, and so they kind of made that judgment call. Very interesting. So what they foresaw was actually quite prophetic, because and in text 6, the Rambam just explains this, so you could see that in the source there, but I'm not going to read it now. So anyways, Rabbi Yehuda's foresight was actually turned out to be prophetic, because right after he committed the Mishnah to writing, about 100 years later, Constantine adopted Christianity, the Emperor of Rome, and he became the Holy Roman Emperor. Okay, now it was illegal to be Jewish. So what they did is they said, we're going to empty out the study halls of Israel. And basically they decimated the scholarship in Israel. They brutalized the people there, and basically ceased to function. And the study of the oral Torah shifted to Bavel exclusively, almost exclusively. But by this time, they already had a portable oral Torah that they could travel with, and they could move around, and they didn't have to rely on some some sages. Although written Torah always needs oral Torah. There's no such thing as an independent book that doesn't need any interpretation or understanding. So people were very, very dependent on the teachers of the Mishnah, right? Especially because you'll see how the Mishnah is written. It's not written in order to be a way for everyone to know everything. It's just a way to record the kind of basic ideas of like the headers of the laws. And we'll see that in a second. But let's look at in figure 2.3, the Tanaim. So you have Hillel and Shammai. It says each year that they were on page 47. It says the approximate years and the noted Tanaim of that era, and then any historical events that they were associated with. This gives a very clear picture of the timeline of the different sages and the different things that were going on at that time. You'll see how Rabbi Akiva, he has these four primary students, and these are actually he used to have many more, but they died. But so these are the main ones that carried on his Torah. And then you have the compilers of the Mishnah on the bottom over there. Okay, so far so good. Great. Mishnah means, okay, so what did they write? Let's talk about the Mishnah. So Mishnah, this is all messed up because this is supposed to be a PowerPoint and this is Google Slides instead. But Mishnah comes to the word shana. Shana means review, and also comes from the word sheni, secondary, because it's kind of a supplement to the Torah, right? So it's kind of the Mishnah is the Torah's, companion. So okay. Now they divided the Mishnah. They made sure that every single word was precise, and this is what they accepted as the authoritative record of the oral Torah throughout the nations of Israel. Now, if you wanted to have a grasp of the Mishnah, you obviously still had to study it from a teacher. You couldn't just pick up a manuscript, which is probably very rare. It was probably it's probably like when computers first came out, they were only the most elite scholars got those computers. But now it's the same thing with these manuscripts. So you still weren't fully able to go and do this, but it was a lot more accessible, and it had about 200,000 words in it, and they grouped it into about 500 chapters and through 63 sections called tractates. Okay, and these tractates can be grouped into 6 orders, and it's important to kind of know these 6 orders because that's how you navigate the oral Torah, because everything is based on these categories, where you find something in the Talmud, where you find something in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. Everything stems from the way that they organize the Mishnah. Okay, now these 6 categories, we're going to learn what they are, and we're going to see their scope and how they actually work. Okay. You have a figure on figure 2.5, page 50. This is, you have a menorah, and this is a visualization of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. So in the middle branch, the stem, you'll have the written Torah, and everything, all the other 6 branches stem from that, right? So you have seeds, Zerayim, that deals with agricultural law, Moed, and it says how many tractates are in that. You have Moed, appointed times, Shabbos and holidays, Nashim, it means women. It deals with any marriage and divorce laws, Nezikin, damages. Now, these categories are really broad, and they actually need to be divided much further. They don't all, these are not good categories. The Rambam, when he wrote his categorizations, he used 14 categories because many of the laws in these books could really loosely fit into that category. And we're about to see how. You'll experience this yourself in a second. In exercise 2.1, look at this list, this table that you have, and try to, based on the explanation on of what these orders are, try to match the orders to the topic based on what you intuitively think they are. The last 6 will be very hard to do because they're counterintuitive. You started early, so you get a 5-second delay. Yeah. What?
I'm going with his answers.
I want to see if he gets the last few right.
So the Mishnah has no, Haggadah in it, right? There's no, ethical, or it's law.
There is.
There is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pirkei Avos.
Oh, Pirkei, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
There might be more that I don't remember about, but Pirkei Avos is definitely what comes to mind. There's also things that are part of that era, but not part of the official Mishnah. That like
Brisa.
you have the Brises, the Toseftas, the Sifri, the Sifra.
Yeah.
Those are all Midrashin type of things. So
Right,
those have a lot of that stuff.
That's why I said what I said.
Yeah.
Incorrectly, obviously. I thought,
No,
I
yeah.
thought those were excluded from the Mishnah because.
Oh,
they
that
were-
yeah, that's very. I
but
mean,
I don't, no, I'm sure I'm wrong.
well, yeah. Okay, time's up. Okay, what did you got for number 1? Laws forbidding the use of fruit of a tree during the first 3 years. Where's that going to be? What order? Zeraim. Correct. 2, laws governing the delivery of a bill of divorce via an agent. Nashim. Yes, marriage and divorce. No one on Zoom knows the answers? Number 3, a list of the Psalms sung by the Levites during the Holy Temple's daily service. Where are you going to find that? Very good. Kachim, which is dealing with temple service. No, Irv, I want to hear you. I want to hear. He gets paid. He gets paid to do this.
I want to hear him. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, your father's paying for you to do that.
Haven't paid yet.
For his tuition in school, not here. Yeah. Laws of concerning the red heifer.
Taharot.
Oh, who was that?
Bill.
Bill. Bill's still with us. Taharot. Okay, let's see. Very good. Red heifer is a cow that we slaughter in order to purify someone who touched a dead body or was contacted through a dead body. Okay. No, laws concerning the Passover Seder. Where's that going to be?
Moed.
Moed. Very good. Yosef Yitzchak, you got to hurry up. Okay. Laws concerning the obligation to return lost property to its owner.
Nezikin.
Very good. Civil and criminal law is in Ezekiel. Okay. Laws governing the portions of the Torah to be read on Shabbos and holidays. Well, it is correct. Laws of vows. Any other?
Nashim.
Nashim, marriage and divorce. It's probably in Nashim because of where it is in the Torah itself, I think. Laws and vows is said in context of a husband nullifying their wife's vows and stuff like that. Fine, moving on. What we say? Oh, laws governing interactions between Jews and idolaters. Ezekiel, civil and criminal law.
Because I heard from the Talmud, from the Gemara, I got that.
Okay, very good. Moving on. A discussion on the identity of the books of scripture to be considered part of the Tanakh.
It's not what you said.
It's a random guess at this point.
Moed.
Okay. Moed, it's in Taharos, which makes sense a little bit. Once you hear it, it makes sense because like they're discussing which things are going to be holy, which things are going to be, sanctified. Yeah, all that stuff. Also, kosher laws. Is that here?
Yeah. Well, then
Oh, the laws regarding the prohibition of mixing meat and milk. No, yeah, it should be in there. No, I'm joking.
Um,
Where do you have the kosher laws?
oh, gotcha. No,
Kachim. Kachim, temple service. Because that's where it deals with sacrifices and all sorts of things related to eating that animals, and so lumped in there is eating non-holy animals called chulin. Okay, moving on. Laws of the daily prayers. Ooh, that was the Zerayim. Agricultural laws. Figure that one out. Okay, because you got to pray in order to grow anything. Moving on. I don't even think that's a joke. I think that's really, I don't know. We'll figure that out.
Is it possible like some of these like could just fall in there because they were introduced by another topic and therefore
Yes, yes. It's probably because food a lot of the agricultural laws revolve around the food, and a lot of the blessings are about the food. And so prayer comes up through that, through the different blessings that are recited during prayer, things like that. There's a bunch of different explanations for this. The reason that they say to do, some explain that the reason it's because it's meant to be in the beginning. They want that to be in the beginning because that tractate covers a lot of the fundamentals of Jewish faith, praying to Hashem and who we pray to and all that. And so that belongs in the beginning. So it's just part of Zerayim, but you can actually say it's like pre-six Seders, right? Because six of the six orders. That's kind of one way to look at it.
Well, and that's how it ends up in the Gemara, I think, right?
Yeah, Brachos is the first one. Yeah.
So the four are separated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Separated from all the others. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so that's the six orders, and this flows again through the Gemara, through the text after the Gemara. Everything is divided kind of in this sense. The Rambam departed from this. He made his own categories that are based on them. They're not completely off, but the Rambam saw a more befitting way of organizing things.
What do you mean?
He has 14 categories. He separates things out of he has Sefer Ava. There's no Sefer Ava.
I don't know if you need. He's not in his.
In the Rambam Sefer,
Yeah.
no, yeah. In the Rambam's compilation of Jewish law, he wanted to make a fresh. He was thinking of efficiency and accessibility over everything. He threw out a lot of different things. He threw out sourcing things. He threw out disputes. He threw out he just re-envisioned Jewish law.
Hey, Rabbi.
Yeah.
In Rambam's 14 categories, are each of the categories can they fit under the six orders, or is it completely different?
Yeah, everything fits in the six orders, but they're more precise. Like some of these things you wouldn't lump together. So he actually has a separate category for those things. He wouldn't lump prayer into Zerayim. So he has a sefer. He has something called Ahava, which deals with which means love. The first one. It deals with all the fundamentals of Jewish faith and with all of those things, and prayer and everything like that. And then he has, sorry, that's Avoda. That's the second.
Right.
And Avoda. Well, he has some of his in Ava, and he has also an Avoda, but he categorized it more precisely,
Okay.
more intuitively, right? So you can find something in the Rambam very easily. Anyways, moving on. So let's get a taste of the Mishnah now that we know what it is. Okay, it's written very concisely, right? So we're going to look at a sample of the Mishnah from Pesachim, chapter 10. Okay, so if you want to look it up in your Mishnayos, you could go online and and find the Mishnayos online, or it's our textbook. But I'm saying for later, you want to learn it in depth with the commentary, then you can do so also. That's fun to do. So let's look at a sample here. We're going to learn this Mishnah, and then we're going to learn some of the rules of how the Mishnah operates, and just how do you approach a Mishnah when you learn it. So let's look at the line 1. We must refrain from eating on the eve of Passover, from close to the time of Mincha prayers, until after darkness has fallen. We said this last week. Yeah, this was the first line. We read this first line last week, and we had a back and forth about which things are very ambiguous here. And we're going to discuss that again. Second law, clause. even the most destitute person in the Jewish nation should not eat unless he's reclining. He should not be provided with less than 4 cups of wine, even if he's being supplied by the public food bank, right? People are very up in arms about what people buy with government money. Well, if they saw him buying 5 cases of wine, they might. It's because it's Pesach, and it says it in the Mishnah that he's supposed to do that. Okay, next one. When they pour him his first cup of wine, according to Beit Shammai, he should first recite the blessing over the festival and then the blessing over the wine. According to Beit Hillel, he should first recite the blessing over the wine and then the blessing over the festival. I'm going to explain that last law in a minute. So these are 2 Mishnahs. We learned Mishnah 1 and 2 of chapter 10. And these are the opening of the Mishnah's laws on the Seder night. And we're going to use this Mishnah to teach some of the important principles of the structure of how a Mishnah works and what we're supposed to, how you're supposed to learn a Mishnah. The first thing that you see in the sample, in the first law that you have, is that, so it's saying that we have to not eat for a few hours before nightfall on Passover Eve, right? And what's the reason for this? What do we say the reason was for this? Because if you eat, it's going to be very hard to eat matzah. It's also going to be very hard to eat roasted lamb. But matzah, yes, it's very hard to go into the meal, the mitzvah of matzah, and we have a mitzvah to eat matzah, which is very important. We also have a mitzvah to eat a meal. Yeah? You're saying the carbon Pesach.
By the time you get the
Afikomen. Exactly, right. So you're saying we have that issue anyway. No, well, that's not so true because everyone's starving by karpas, right? And by the time you're eating matzah, you're wolfing it down.
Right.
So everyone's pretty ravenous for matzah by the time they get to it. And that's by design, guys. Guys, if you ever wondered why we feel like we're starving here and we're sitting here at the Seder and we're starving, it's because the sages wanted to ruin your life. Now, so some people, they bring a Snickers to the Seder, but they didn't learn this Mishnah. Okay. Yeah? Yes, we don't. Our custom, I'm Bukhar, I've never fasted because the custom is to not fast because it actually is worse to fast and to go into Pesach starving because you're going to have an issue sitting there and actually participating properly. You shouldn't be starving. And we're going to learn, we'll go into this. People asked actually a couple practical questions last week. And what would be a fun exercise that we don't have time for, but you could do it on your own, is to go to Sefaria, look up this Mishnah, and then click on the resource. I have to show you guys how to do this. That would be fun. Should I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Safari is good, but I'm warning you that Safari's default translation of Tanakh is not is actually not a authentic translation. They provided a New Age translation. It was made in order to conform to gender. They just took out all the gender all the references to. No, that's only in Tanakh. They didn't mess with the Mishnah. So we want to go to which tractate are we in? Which Seder? Which Seder? Oh, I'm not even sharing this, guys. I'm sorry. How do I share this screen?
Good idea.
I want to share this screen also. It's only sharing the screen that I selected previously. Hold on. Let me stop share and then I'll reshare. This is fun. We'll do this. This is off topic. So anyone who doesn't like this can get a refund. This one?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, so let's go here. Okay, this is safaria.com. Psachim. Okay, which chapter are we in Psachim? N. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Wait,
Which-
the end?
Which Mishnah? And 1 and 2. Right, we're in one. We do 1 and Aleph and Beis, 1 and 2. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to understand this Mishnah a little bit more. So don't look at this. This is cheating. Let me get rid of this.
And this is like the way like, learning Mishnah is from Svaria safe, or it's like.
Well, it always says on top what the source is. So this says Koren.
Ah,
Koren is safe for now. Yeah,
okay.
it's safe. It hasn't been hostilely taken over by donors who want to change Judaism. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the guy who does as far as amazing.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I love him. He has a great mission, but somebody donated enough money to change his opinion about who his audience is. I don't blame him. I think that whatever. I still use it. Okay. So the first place you want to look to understand the basic Mishnah is the Bar Tanura. What he does, he actually basically summarizes what the Gemara says about that Mishnah. And it's very, very succinct and easy to understand the Mishnah when you're using the Bar Tanura. Yes, exactly. Another way to cheat. Okay, another thing you do is you go into the Rambam. He also explains Mishnayos. He has he wrote an explanation of Mishnayos. Yeah. And so he writes also an explanation. Another thing you should do, and we'll actually read these in a second. I'm just showing you the basic. There's a lot of people here. Then another good thing to do is go into halacha and actually see the link, the hyperlink to where this is brought down in actual halacha. Straight though, so we kind of skipped over the Gemara. You can read the Rambam; it's good for that also. But the Shulchan Aruch is where really the code of Jewish law is the most practical, the most applied. And here he says, and I'm going to open up the Shulchan Aruch. This is only in Hebrew, unfortunately, but he brings down this rule. Oh no, this is Dinei Haseba. Why is it not Dinei Haseba? Let's try it here. I'm looking for the rules of eating. Oh, here he is. Okay, we'll just yeah. Okay, so he brings down these rules. Let's scroll this. Where is that? He says it's prohibited to eat bread. He says bread from the 10th hour and above. So he defined mincha as the 10th hour, and that's debated in the Mishnah, right? The 10th hour means from sunrise, 10 hours from sunrise. So if it's 6 p.m., it's going to be 3 p.m. Is that right? Whatever. I don't care. And then, yeah, so ish. So, in order, he gives the reason that you eat matzah with appetite. However, if you eat a little bit of fruit or vegetables, however, you could eat a little bit of fruit or vegetables, but you don't fill up yourself. And then it brings in parentheses, if he's a very sensitive person, he can even eat a little bit. And if he even eats a little bit, he's not going to be able to have an appetite at all. He should not eat at all. The reason he's bringing that is because in the Gemara, there's an opinion that says don't eat anything at all. He used to fast the whole time because if he eat anything, he wasn't able to eat anything at night. He only ate once a day. That's it. So he's saying if you have that issue, don't eat. So this is I think Phil asked this, how can I go? What if I'm starving? What happens? And so you'll see already in the Gemara they had that question. And it says you're allowed to eat fruit. And then if you click into the Shulchan Aruch and you look at the commentary in the Shulchan Aruch, you'll go and you'll see many of these, the Mishnah Berurah and others, will say fruit doesn't mean fruit. It means anything that isn't bread. So you can have a lot of things, just not a meal. Don't get full. Okay? So you can eat.
Yeah, but you also can't have hummus because it's probably past the time that you're not allowed.
Yes, you can have chametz. You for sure can't have chametz. The sages decreed not to have chametz from the 4th hour of the day, and it's prohibited to have chametz. It becomes ownerless. It becomes not even in your possession. You're not even allowed to have benefit from it from midday, 6 hours into the day. But I just wanted to show you this because this is just how you trace I hope this isn't in any future lessons. I haven't seen them yet, but this is good. Okay, so let me get back to the program. Share screen. Where's the other screen? Here it is. Okay. So none of that was in the Mishnah, by the way. So that was all expounded on in the Gemara. Everything that we just learned is all in the Gemara. The Mishnah is just saying this one thing: don't eat on Passover, on the eve of Passover, until it gets dark. So the first principle of Mishnayos is that it is assuming you have knowledge. It is not giving you a comprehensive understanding of anything. It doesn't even have the mitzvahs of, doesn't even explain how to do mezuzah, tefillin. A lot of things are not explained in the Mishnah. It just assumes everyone knows them. Another theory for why it doesn't have a lot of those mitzvahs is because they thought that those mitzvahs are very nationalistic and very Jewish, and it would peeve the Romans who they had good relations with, and it would seem like they're trying to create a Jewish identity against the Roman identity. And what does that tell you about wearing mezuzah and tefillin and tzitzis and having a mezuzah? What does that tell you? That it was a threat to the Roman government because it was too Jewish. So I think that's a very profound idea. But it's not in the Mishnayos. It's not expounded onto the Mishnayos. They assume everyone knows it. They assume you're coming to the table. That means you know that it's Pesach. You know what? That you know that you have to eat matzah on Pesach. Yeah, they all tried, and so that's the point. You don't have to take it too seriously. Okay, you're saying why didn't they put it in the Mishnah? Why were they so scared? I don't know. Yeah. Who?
Because the Egyptians thought the Jews were too powerful.
Yeah. Right. Everyone has the same issue. Yeah, it's very cyclic. But let's. There's a whole JLI course about anti-Semitism. But let's move on let's move on here. So we're assuming. So it says we must refrain from eating on the eve of Passover from close to the time of reciting the mincha prayers until after darkness has fallen. Right. It doesn't say anywhere about the mitzvah that you have to eat matzah at the dinner. Right. It's just saying you have to have a Passover dinner at the night of Passover. And this is kind of our first insight into the Mishnah's construction, right? The rabbis who wrote the Mishnah, they assumed that we would thoroughly have studied the Torah, and they assumed that the readers would be very familiar with the ordinary Jewish practices, and they wrote the rest in response to what the readers would already be familiar with. Okay? So it's super catered to what they felt people should know. And it's very need to know type of stuff is written in there. Okay. Next thing, the next principle is there's a very concise style. No extra words are in the Mishnah. They wanted every word to be purposeful because a person would be able to derive mountains and mountains of Jewish law from, and this is what they wrote it for, right? If you're going to write a record of the oral law, it's going to be very sensitive what you write in it. So they wrote. So let's look at the specificity here. Okay, the first rule. We're talking about concision. How concise they were first. Precise is the next principle. Sorry, I mixed it. Concise means that they were writing in a very short style. So meaning you have two clauses here, right? Right. The ones that are highlighted on the screen. Those two clauses contain 4 laws in a very concise manner, right? The first law is we got to eat reclining, right? Second law, that a poor person needs to recline as well, right? The way it's structured is it's written in a way that it could have been written as 2 separate laws, right? The way I would say it is, for clarity, I would say first the principle that we all have to recline, and then I would say even a poor person has to recline. But the Mishnah is very concise, and it says it all in one clause. Even a poor person has to recline. Why would you think a poor person shouldn't recline? Because it seems very strange for a guy with no shirt and who has a rat living with him as a pet to be sitting like a king on Pesach. It's very hard to do, actually. There's a joke about a lady who wanted to seem like a Jewish lady. She was a baba from the shtetl, but she came to America and she wanted to seem like she fit in. She wanted to be able to mingle with, the people at the country club. They weren't so friendly to people who spoke Yiddish. So she hired someone to teach her perfect English to speak with, fancy, good, proper mannerisms. She shows up to the country club. She's talking. She's all posh, and the waiter spills soup on her dress, and she goes, "Oy vey!" And she's like, "Whatever that means." Okay, but that's the idea. It's very hard to be a pauper and to lean. Fine. That's okay. Next clause, right, talks about that we have to have 4 cups at the Seder. Mind you, this is the beginning of the laws about the Seder. Okay, this is the first chapter that deals with Seder. So it's assuming a lot of things, or it's packing in a lot of things. Yeah, it says 4 cups of wine. You're gonna get drunk. Yes. No, I mix my wine with grape juice, or I just have grape juice because it says on the bottle that you can fulfill the mitzvah.
Right.
And if it says it on the bottle,
Good enough for
the Mishnah must have had that in mind.
But they even say in the Gemara, things about that anything could be fermentable, like grape juice.
Yeah, you can make grape juice in prison into wine, which is
And you know that.
Rabbi Rabashkin, who
Okay.
was in prison, he lost his grape juice privilege because someone stole his grape juice and made it into wine in the toilet or whatever. Okay, it's called toilet wine. Anyways, you get a lot more than you bargained for in this class. Okay. And then the other law is that you could take from the public food bank, and you have to take, the public food bank is required to pay for this mitzvah, this luxurious expense, which would have seemed very counterintuitive back in the day. The next concept. So when you're learning a Mishnah, you have to keep these things in mind. You have to say, I'm not just reading one thing. You have to say, how many things am I reading in this line? Otherwise, you'll miss it. Precise wording. Okay? When it says a word, it's because it's that word. It doesn't mean a different word. Okay? It's like, there's a joke about a lady. I love these jokes. There's a joke about a lady who bought her grandchild 2 beautiful sweaters. And the child came out wearing one sweater. She's like, "You're only wearing one sweater. Does that mean you don't like the other one?" Okay? So yeah. So basically, you have to glean a lot of information from the wording. So here it says, "We must refrain from eating on the eve of Passover." Why did they say the eve of Passover? Why didn't they say the eve of every other holiday? Every holiday has an eve, and every holiday has a meal, right? So on Sukkot, there's a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah. Are we allowed to eat prior to? Are you? Well, does it apply or not? Okay. So from the precision of this wording, right, you could assume, you might say that it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to any other holidays. And why would it apply only to Pesach? Because on Pesach you have an issue. You have an issue that you have to eat matzah and the carbon Pesach, but nowadays just matzah, right? So you have a specific prohibition, you have a specific protection, a legislation, to avoid eating on Pesach. And so they wanted us to have extra gusto when we eat matzah and extra appetite. So they were more careful. They weren't as careful with eating other holidays. And if they didn't use that wording, you would not know that. You wouldn't assume that. Okay.
Shabbos, we don't eat past outside until the English.
We don't have a meal, right? But there's a general rule that you don't ever, whenever you're obligated in a mitzvah, you're not allowed to eat. If it's like a time-sensitive mitzvah, you're not allowed to eat before the mitzvah because we're afraid if you start a meal, you're going to miss the opportunity to do the mitzvah. So it applies to a lot of things. Megillah, it applies to Hanukkah menorah, it applies to even Ma'ariv, the evening services. If you're not davened yet, you can't eat generally. It's allowed if you have a set time. If you have a set time to eat, you have a set time to daven. Sorry, then we don't think you're going to miss it. Or if you have someone to remind you, whatever. There's ways around it. Moving on. So, okay. So it says, so as you see from these beautiful icons, you can't eat before Pesach because you need matzah. But what about other holidays? Who knows why there's 3 candles in the picture? That's the Chabad universal sign of Shabbos instead of 2 candles, because we believe that the Rebbe reinstituted the custom that all Jewish girls should light Shabbos candles even before they are married or bat mitzvah. What's 3 years old? Yeah, they start at 3, but they don't like 3. They only like 1. Okay. You're saying it hints to the age that they start. Okay, another thing is there's no extra words. So it says here in the first clause, we must refrain from eating them from close to the time of Mincha until after darkness has fallen. What do we learn from the fact? It could have said something else. It didn't have to say until after darkness has fallen. It could have just said, don't eat from Mincha. You would know that it means don't eat until you start the meal to eat the matzah. Why does it have to stress until darkness has fallen? And you can see from the icons what the answer is. What do we learn from the fact that it went out of its way to include these seemingly overly explanative words? These icons are not that clear, I guess. No, that's not it. That's Lake Michigan, by the way. So most holidays start at sunset. Okay? Most the day starts at sunset. Okay? The fact that it says until it's dark doesn't mean sundown. Dark means actual night, right? Which is when we dive in the evening services. It's a different period of time. It's when there's 3 stars visible. It's not sundown. And so nightfall is the only time that you're allowed to eat matzah. The mitzvah only starts at nightfall. That's a very big detail that you wouldn't have had, but it's embedded in that extra word of, there's extra 2 words, ad shetechshach, which is in the Mishnah, it's 2 words. So that's how we know, kind of, that you need to only eat matzah once it's nightfall. That's why you'll have these seders. Sometimes a Chabad will have a seder where nightfall is going to be 9 o'clock, but we start the seder at 5, and we basically tell jokes for 4 hours because we don't want anyone to eat matzah before, but we can't start the seder at 9. So we basically start the seder. This is an extreme circumstance. People aren't going to have a seder and eat the matzah on time. So we have a seder, the whole thing, basically, do the whole shtick. And then we do the mitzvahs at the right time. Kiddush and everything has to be done after nightfall. It's very hard to do. And then the rabbi will go have his seder at home at 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, moving on. Multiple opinions. We don't do that here, guys. We have the real stuff. Multiple opinions. Another concept. The 4th rule of our sample. We have 2 opinions in this Mishnah, right? They have a dispute. So until now, there was no dispute, and we talked about that because everyone agrees with this. These clauses, which is incredible that they all agree on that stuff. And then the dispute comes into when you're making kiddush. You have in your book, you have in my book, I can't even read it, but maybe you can in yours. Page 54, you have a text of the Haggadah. You see how the Kiddush is ordered. First, you have a blessing on wine, which is every time you make a blessing on food, you say a blessing. Every time you eat food, you make a blessing. So you make a blessing on wine. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. And then you talk about the holiday that you are consecrating with the Kiddush. Kiddush is basically a statement of that this is a holy period of time, and we're doing that over a holy, a very important drink, which is the most important drink, wine, and that's the idea of Kiddush. So there was debate about between Hillel and Shammai, and we'll see the reason for the debate in later lessons, or we'll just do the later lesson now if everyone's in the mood. We'll just do lesson 5. Yeah. Oh no, okay, sorry. You guys don't look tired, so I thought you could do it, but I guess not. I'm not going to take offense to that at all. But Shammai says first you talk about the day. You say thank you God for sanctifying this day that you got outside of Egypt and blah blah blah. Then you say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen, drink the wine. Hillel says first you make the Hagafen, and then you bless the day. We do this every Shabbos, right? First we say Baruch, we have some preamble, then you say Hagafen, and then you make the blessing on Shabbos.
To a Seder, that's what we know from.
Yep, Shammai, yeah. Halacha is like Hillel. Yeah.
But it makes,
You can probably figure out why one would say the one, but we'll do that in a different lesson. Okay. So now we learned 4 rules of reading any Mishnah.
yeah, Shammai, I mean, the bracha is supposed to be most proximal to the actual
Right.
mitzvah, and so Shammai is
Right.
actually in that regard, the
Right.
most proximal is the blessing for the
Right.
wine before the drinking.
I can argue though, and we'll do this because this is what it's about. I can argue
But
that what does
no.
proximal mean? I can say first of all, what does proximal mean? Proximal means there's no interruption. If you're doing something that's part of the same subject matter, and it's actually the purpose of what you're doing, there's no interruption, right? And now the blessing is you could say it's all one long blessing. There's no interruption. It's just one long thing, meaning it's not a separate thing that you're going to talk about sports in middle, right? That's first of all.
Mhm.
But you still have a point. But you have to say why it's even better to go Hillel's way. What's the whole point of Kiddush? Kiddush is sanctifying the day. You're pronouncing the holiness of the day. You're supposed to do it over a cup of wine. When, right? The cup of wine, and you have to drink the cup of wine. So what's the main thing happening here? The Kiddush, the holiness, the sanctification of the day. So you want that to be proximal to drinking the wine. In fact,
And that's why we did the
just to prove my point, and I'm making this all up. I didn't even learn this yet. but just to prove my point, the idea of you can't, if I make a blessing on this seltzer and you're also drinking seltzer, you can't use my blessing. You can only do that for a mitzvah. I can only transfer my blessing to you for a mitzvah.
Okay.
Meaning it doesn't function. Meaning, but by Kiddush, we make a blessing on the grape juice, and it does transfer to you. You could use it. Why? Because it's a mitzvah. And if it was just a regular blessing on the food, which is what you were trying to say, should be closer to the drinking, then it wouldn't be transferable.
Exactly.
Because it's a mitzvah, it is transferable. So what's the main component here? The mitzvah. And that's the part that goes next to the drinking of the wine.
Good.
The rest of my case.
Good.
All right. Yeah.
Well,
That was all in the
so-
footnote here. I'm
the kind of an argument that
Yeah. This is just using my logic. I didn't even look this up. You could look this up later and find somebody who says this probably, which is the part of the thrill of learning Gemara. But right now we're just and when you learn a Mishnah that has this much ambiguity, it just begs the questions, it begs the analysis, and it's just beautiful and fun.
but even
Okay.
the succinctness of it, like they say, even the most destitute person, the Gemara would then say, I mean.
Yes, the Gemara would qualify that. Yeah.
They would say, well, does it include the richest person even, or something, even though it sounds like, logically it does.
Yeah.
They wouldn't,
They don't leave any stone unturned.
yeah.
Very true. Okay, now we're approaching the end here. Now this is the why, the soul of the Mishnah. Okay? This is what Hasidus brings to the table. Mishnah has a very special, we have a very special relationship with Mishnah. Not just a stepping stone to Gemara, not just a way for us to learn more practical law, but it has a unique role. We have a unique relationship with Mishnayos. We learned last time that there's an idea to memorize Mishnayos. And the Talmud teaches that the covenant between God and the Jewish people was primarily sealed around the oral Torah. They make a statement like this. Look at text 8 on page 57. Rabbi Yochanan taught, God made a covenant with the Jewish people only for the sake of the Torah materials that were transmitted orally. Baal Peh. It is therefore stated, and he quotes a little verse that hints to this idea, for on the basis of these matters, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. The word on the basis in Hebrew is al pi. And he's using the al pi means based on the words on the oral. On the oral, he's using it as like a double. He's using another like a hinted meaning to it. So but the general crux of Rabbi Yochanan's statement is that the oral Torah is really that binder between us and Hashem. That's really what gives us that connection. And there's different explanations for why that is. Why is this so? Right? The what is the covenant? The covenant is basically Hashem's relationship and bond with us, like our marriage to Hashem. What's the glue of that marriage? Right? Our involvement is the glue of that marriage. Our commitment to the relationship, our interest in the relationship, right? So you have the text, which is dictated to us, which is the written part. That's just Hashem telling us what is, and that's like the manual. And then you have us trying to internalize it, relate to it, expound on it, answer to it, and kind of it's our response in a certain way, right? And it's more than that. Actually the Maharal is a sage, Rabbi Yehuda Lowy. He actually is the famous the Prague legends are about him, and the Golem legends, the Golem.
Right.
Yeah. So let's look what he writes about this. By the way, Maharal is pre-Hasidus, but a lot of Hasidus is based on the Maharal because the first Lubavitcher Rebbe was a great grandson of the Maharal.
Oh.
Yes. Yes. All the Gorarie, yeah. Okay, moving on. Let's read it inside. The Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral tradition, exists through human engagement, thereby bonding the Torah with the Jewish people. Had the Torah been confined exclusively to parchment, it would lack this human bond. The human bond is in the oral Torah. The human input and the human internalization of it. It's not just dictated to us, but we're participating in it, and we're it's like, let's say our spouse, right? Let's say she gives you a manual of all the things she likes or wants, right? So if you do all of those things, you're very, you're loyal, right? But if you sit there writing notes and observations and figuring her out and expounding on it and memorizing, well, I'll get to the memorizing in a second. That's another part. And really thinking about it, then you're learning about her and really it's consuming you, and so you have a relationship there that's way beyond just loyalty. That's what you have now is love. What you have now is attachment, is obsession.
That's right. You get to know her in or
You don't understand it,
you
right?
get to know her very, very intimately.
Yes, the intimacy. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes. With Hashem, you're basically saying, yes, I understand that you gave me these laws. Now I want to know every detail of it, and not just that, I'm going to memorize it. What does memorizing it do? Memorizing, I don't know if you've ever memorized something, literally just the word for word memorization, not memorizing conceptually. But when you memorize something, and I hate doing it, but when I've done it, this has been the effect. You are uniquely capable of treating every single word like it matters, and then being able to think about those words and analyze those words on an unprecedented level. Because now you have so much access. The words are so much more ingrained and important, and they take, because each word you suffered to memorize each word. So you okay, why is that word there? I never thought about that before. That happens uniquely when you memorize it. So memorizing Mishnayos has been the main way to learn it for that reason, because you really unify and become one with the subject, and you really are able to really learn it when you memorized it. So the custom was always to memorize Mishnayos. Any questions on that? No. People memorize Gemara too, but it's different. Mishnayos is so much more concise.
Well, you can't memorize.
People, yes. There's a famous thing that people used to do. First of all, any like leader of the Jewish people worth his salt has memorized the Talmud.
Memorize
Both of them.
Both
Yeah.
of them.
And the Tosfos and the Rashi. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a common knowledge. Moshe Feinstein knew the whole Torah Baal Peh. Everyone knows that. I mean, it's demonstrated clearly over and over and over again. Any of the main people, they can quote. Of course, I saw someone do it. He wasn't even famous. You could do a pin test. You could put a pin in the Gemara. He'd tell you where the pin falls every single page. It's just photographic memory. It's not that hard. You're born with that gift, but some people weren't born with it and they still did it because they killed themselves over it. But it used to be, guys, it's interesting that you're surprised. You used to not be able to get into yeshiva if you didn't memorize the entire Torah.
Well, shouldn't be surprised that I'm not. I should be surprised. You, on the other hand, I shouldn't be surprised.
There still is like every.
There's yeshivas that like that. Yeah. Yeah.
In Israel to this day.
Till this day. Yeah. The kids memorize before they learn Mishnayos, they have to know Tanakh. Before they learn, yeah, and they everything they learn.
I mean,
Pretty long.
no, it's long, but
I know someone in the sister who knows the entire Sefer Tehillim. But you tell him like once
Yeah.
he continues it,
He might be a savant though.
Silverberg.
Yeah, no, he's not a savant. He's just a regular. Yeah, no, yeah, I know him. Okay, so so I mean that's what we our standards are much higher than you find out there in the world today. No, they weren't. I don't believe that. I think their neshamas were on a higher level, able to comprehend higher levels of Torah knowledge, but I don't think there's. Where does it say that? Where does it say that their IQ? Actually, there's actually sources that say that Moshe's intelligence, Moshe Rabbeinu, was not that gifted. I have to look into that. I have that somewhere. I've seen that somewhere that Moshe was not particularly gifted. It says that. It says that somewhere intellectually, but his soul was on a very high level. Usually, it goes part and parcel. You're right, but you don't have to be a genius to be a Torah scholar. It just happens to be that it's a big advantage. But there's stories. Okay, moving on. Let's wrap up. Anyways, there's another famous correlation between Mishnah and Neshama. They have the same exact words, letters, right?
yeah.
Let's see that in this. Okay, that's all messed up. But Mishnah and Neshama. So there's actually a statement from the Arizal, who is a big source of Kabbalah, that to elevate the soul of oneself and then by extension, people who passed away, we learn Mishnayos in their memory, and Mishnayos for ourselves gives us a spiritual boost, which is purely on a spiritual level, nothing to do with the information, just learning Mishnayos. And if you think about it for a second, when you write something, this isn't explained in here, but when you write something, when someone with divine inspiration writes the Torah, and especially the Mishnah, which was literally meant to be the savior of the Jewish people, they invest their soul into it. The people who wrote it, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who is one of the greatest people who ever lived, he put himself into the Mishnah. And when you learn that, besides for that God's in it, but he, with his divine inspiration, is in it. And God is in there. But when you learn that, right, you're tapping into something very, 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 very profoundly holy. But in a different way than the written Torah. Because with this, it's more accessible. You're able to learn and understand it differently. And so it has a profound effect on your neshama. Moving on. Okay, so let's do the key points, and then I'll let you guys go.
Lesson 2, the Mishnah. 1. The oral tradition was initially preserved orally to ensure precise transmission, active engagement by students, and exclusivity to the Jewish people. 2. Disputes in halacha began with Hillel and Shammai due to the Sanhedrin's diminishing ability to resolve questions definitively. 3. Roman persecutions led to the proliferation of halachic disputes and the potential loss of the oral Torah. This necessitated its preservation in written form. 4. Rabbi Yehuda the Prince compiled the Mishnah during a peaceful period, documenting the oral Torah to safeguard it for future generations. 5. The Mishnah was meticulously composed and organized into 6 orders: Seraim, Moed, Nashim, Nizikin, Kodshim, and Taharot. These cover broad categories of Jewish law. 6. The Mishnah's brevity facilitates efficient memorization and study. Each of its statements conveys multiple laws or principles. 7. Every word in the Mishnah is chosen for precision and clarity, and often implies additional rules or exceptions.
8. Although the Mishnah was composed in part to develop halachic consensus, the authors felt compelled to include multiple opinions on many halachic questions. 9. The study of Mishnah, whose letters are identical to those of the word neshama, soul, strengthens the soul in life and in death because it is fundamental to the covenant between God and the Jewish people.
Next week, decrypting the Mishnah. Wow.
We did that.
We touched it, we broached it, but we're still encrypted. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening, guys. And all you people on Zoom, the soup is going to be incredible, but I can't guarantee that the people who are here are going to make it back home in this weather. But at least they'll have soup.